Hello there and welcome back to JJ Painting. I am JJ and today we are going to be talking all about, as you can tell, the chapter-specific Primaris models. Where are they? Why don't we have any just yet? So this is a bit of a speculative video. We're going to go over a little bit about the Primaris range as it has been in the last couple of years and where we are now with it. And today, because we're talking about Primaris, naturally we're going to paint something that's Firstborn. Yes, indeed, that is a converted Space Wolf, Wolf Lord. So that's what we're going to be painting since we're talking about what the Primaris don't have, and technically that is one of the models. So, without further ado, let's crack on. As I am wont to on this channel, I think it's worth starting off with a bit of history. Let's not forget that, in many respects, the very distinctive units that we see for armies such as Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and even Death Watch are relatively recent. The Angels of Death Codex, which was the original showing of the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels, didn't actually have much in the way of unique models for those two chapters. There were upgrades for the Deathwing in a plastic set that came a lot later, and there were some original metal Dark Angels veterans and some metal Blood Angels veterans originally. But a lot of those, from what I understand, were based off existing models within the Space Marine range and simply had extra bits put onto them. Now, if we fast forward from that point to 2009, that's where we start to see entire ranges being redeveloped for those three armies. Arguably 2007 for Dark Angels when they got their plastic veterans box and a few extra characters. But what I'm going to say now is I'm not talking about characters, I'm talking about the plastic range for the core of the army. So if we look at Dark Angels, we see that in the form of the Deathwing and Ravenwing and arguably the veteran boxes. For the Blood Angels, we see that in the Death Company and again the Sanguinary Guard boxes, and for a little while the Storm Raven. And then if we move over to the Space Wolves, pretty much their entire range has been completely different for most of its history. But then suddenly we find ourselves with Primaris, and none of those chapters actually have unique models in Primaris anymore, beyond a few well-known characters. And incidentally, isn't it somewhat interesting how most of those characters that have become Primaris characters were all existing and quite old? I'm looking specifically at Mephiston and Ragnar here, suddenly have their lovely new plastic kits in Primaris. I think that's quite interesting. A good move, but definitely an interesting one for us looking back at it now. So what this means for us now is, arguably, there are a few exceptions to this rule of plastic. There is the Fangs of Morkai, which is effectively a Reaver squad with an upgrade sprue, and the Primaris Death Company models and the Blood Angels. So technically they do have models, but they are existing kits with upgrade sprues. But again, if we look at pre-2009 Space Wolves, that's effectively what their entire range was. The Long Fangs, Grey Hunters, and Blood Claws of those years were just ordinary Space Marines with a single upgrade sprue. So we've been here before. And the same could be said with the Death Watch. It was a standard Space Marine with a metal upgrade frame that you could get online. And it was only very recently that the Death Watch got anything in plastic, and even then that came as a surprise to a lot of people, especially me. Now, what I think is going to become quite prevalent next, especially for those chapters, is we may see them getting things in plastic, but we also may not at the same time. Let's not forget that they've now moved away from having their own codexes. They have supplements, and this isn't the first time that's happened. Arguably, the Blood Angels codexes and the Dark Angels codexes and the Space Wolf codexes up until 4th edition were very much just supplements. So this is going back to form. In fact, this brings them in line with chapters like Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, Iron Hands, and Salamanders, who for many, many years had absolutely nothing, not even special characters. So I think it's a very good move on the part of Games Workshop to bring all of their Space Marine chapters onto a level with each other. There's no longer a case of one chapter has an entire miniature range and its own codex, and another one has one character in metal that's nearly 12 years old. We're not doing that anymore, and I think Games Workshop have done the right thing there. So then this raises the question, what does this mean then for the future of those codexes who for the past 10 years enjoyed having an entire codex to spread out in? Well, I genuinely think that having supplements is actually a better way for them to work, and the reason I think that is because it means that the actual supplements themselves can devote more space to unique special rules, unique stratagems, warlord traits, relics, and probably a few more characters, and some special units, but not too many. If every single one of them had their own codex, what that effectively means is that all 4 of those codexes, so the Space Marine Codex, the Standard, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves, have to devote space to things like rhinos, explaining Shock Assault, Angels of Death, Scouts, Tactical Squads, Devastators, more so for those two in the case of the Blood Angels and Dark Angels than the Space Wolves, but ultimately you still find yourself in the same place. Now, by taking that out, as I say, it means that you can give more space to expand upon what those chapters are all about. And I think it's probably quite noteworthy that the amount of surprise people got at the content they got from the Ultramarines and Imperial Fist supplements was quite astounding. People weren't expecting to get that much content for their money, effectively, when those supplements came out. Now that we have those other 3 chapters all with their own supplements, I'd say that they have as much, if not more, because obviously they have legacy units such as Deathwing for Dark Angels and Death Company, a lot of deaths in these, Death Company for Blood Angels, in with them. Now, all of that means is that, like I said, those codex supplements, are all now working to a very similar level, and it means that it's less likely for any one chapter to get left behind. So we're not going to see, hopefully, we're not going to see the same thing where the Iron Hands get left behind for many, many years with only a resin upgrade sprue to their name. Hopefully we're past that now. So I suppose you're wondering at this point, how does this actually relate to Primaris units that are specific to certain chapters? Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me and hopefully for you, because obviously we've not seen the equivalent really of Grey Hunters or Blood Claws presented in the Primaris format. And I think the reason for that is that, again, Primaris is still very new. At the time of recording this video, Primaris have only been around for, at most, 4 years. So, as a result, what this means for us as players is that we're dealing with a very, very new army. And I want to make a very similar case for when we saw things like Apocalypse come around. It took a long time for that to flesh out and become a more interesting game. It took many years, in fact. Some people, looking at the first iteration of the Apocalypse game system, don't recognise it to the one that we have now, because now it is effectively its own game system. It's not an add-on to 40k anymore. But we'll do something about Apocalypse at another time. We're talking about Primaris units. So again, to get back to that specifically, I think we aren't seeing it right now because the Primaris units that will be chapter specific haven't manifested themselves either as concepts or in the canon. We're seeing characters, but I also think the characters were slightly easier because of the Rubicon Primaris concept of older Marines making the transition from being Firstborn to Primaris. That's quite good, and it did give Games Workshop the opportunity to update some of its very old characters. Again, I'm looking at you, Mephiston and Ragnar. Sorry guys, but you know, you're very old models. But on top of that, what I think the other thing to bear in mind is because the range is so new, it needed for us to have as much broad appeal as possible. If they followed the same structure as they did before, where Space Wolves have a completely unique force organisation and selection of models, and Dark Angels are about 50-50 with the main Space Marine range, it would effectively mean that some of the most prominent Space Marine armies out there would not have immediate access or an immediately obvious way to access the new Primaris range. So by keeping it neutral, it means that it doesn't matter if you play Space Wolves, Salamanders or Iron Hands, everyone can have intercessors, everyone can have suppressors, everyone can have ATVs and outriders. There is an argument as to how much each one of them fits into the codexes, but that's not really relevant for the purposes of this video. The point is that if you want it, you can have it. So I think in terms of seeing units and armies that are more specific to each chapter manifesting, and I'm talking about things like core units and maybe elite units, I feel that if those are to come, those will probably start coming out in the next 5 or so years. I don't think they're going to be coming around now. And as I said in my Codex video, we've had lots of Space Marine releases over the last 3 years to effectively get the Primaris range out there. And I don't really think that there's a lot of space in most people's minds or wallets to go from having here's the range that everyone can have to here's the models and units that only some of you can have. There is always the alternative that we won't actually see very many of these kits either, because of the rise of things like stratagems and special rules allowing units to be far more customizable in terms of their rules, rather than by their models and by their stat lines. You see things like that far more frequently nowadays anyway. Now, what I think's worth noting at this point before we go any further with the Primaris range as it stands now, is that because there's already so much into it, and it does actually fill a few slots that the Firstborn range doesn't fill. Again, I'm talking about things like suppressors, intercessors, interceptors, veteran intercessors rather, and other models that don't really have an equivalent in the Firstborn range. So in that respect as well, there are a lot of gaps in the Space Marine range as a whole which have been filled, and if we were to start bringing more things in just for Space Wolves or just for Blood Angels, I genuinely feel that that's going to start to hinder Space Marine players rather than help them. Again, the good thing about about Blade Guard, as much as I'm a little bit iffy about them personally, is that they fit as comfortably in Deathwing and Dark Angels as they do in Blood Angels and Iron Hands. They obviously have different benefits from being in each of those chapters, but I think that's probably a better fit rather than having to rely on a whole new kit and a whole new set of rules for different models for them to fit more comfortably within each chapter. And this brings me on to my next point about the Primaris range as it stands. Because we've had so much of it in the last 3 years that is completely new, any new kits that come around now will cause what I'm thinking very much of as Primaris fatigue. Now, we hear this idea of something being fatiguing after a little while, and I do think that if we have any more Primaris models, then we are very quickly going to find ourselves in that position. Like I've said already, we are currently on the 3rd Space Marine Codex in effectively 3, maybe 4 years, and each codex has bought more and more Primaris kits and not any more Firstborn kits. The other reason I say this is we've also just had the supplement updates for the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, the Space Wolves, and the Death Watch. Dark Angels, I know at time of recording haven't been released yet, but they have been announced. Since none of those supplements came with any new Primaris unit kits and only came with character models, that should be a good indicator for everyone that it's unlikely we will see any new Primaris kits that are chapter specific. Because again, like I said, that's where the fatigue starts to come in. But if we think to the future for a second, so a few years down the line, what could happen then? And what this is making me think is that what would be the kits that we would see coming into Primaris? As it stands for the Blood Angels, for example, they have the Death Company, which already have kits, but they already have Sanguinary Guard, but that is easily fulfilled by the Primaris Apothecary. But then there are kits that are less easy to explain away, such as the Furioso and Death Company Dreadnoughts, the Sanguinary Guard, and a handful of other special characters, but again, special characters are a bit different. So I'm focusing mainly on the Sanguinary Guard and the Furioso Dreadnought. Do we think we will see those kits in some sort of Primaris format? If we then think of the Dark Angels, we have things like the Deathwing and the Ravenwing, both of which are quite easily fulfilled by kits within the Primaris range, such as the Blade Guard, the Outriders, and arguably, the new Speeders and the ATV. Now, what this then leads us on to is going, if those kits already fulfill a role, is there really a need for specific chapter Primaris kits? And for those, I'd say no. But if we then move over to Space Wolves, it gets more complicated. As I've already said, Grey Hunters, Longfangs, and Bloodclaws are all unique to Space Wolves and don't necessarily have immediate equivalents in the existing Firstborn range, or even in the Primaris range. So does this mean the Space Wolves will, in time, have their own new version of these in Primaris, when they eventually figure out how to completely reinvent the wheel, as it were? So these are all things that are very possible, in my opinion, and it's unlikely we'll see them anytime soon, because Primaris is so new. I think Games Workshop are still figuring out what they want to do with them long term, but that's my thoughts on it. But as ever, I leave it over to you. What do you think? Do you think we're going to start seeing more chapter-specific Primaris units in the coming years? Do you think we'll have to wait a few years until they update all the supplements? And does this mean, more importantly, that it's just going to be limited to those old chapters, to the 3 chapters who traditionally have always had their own special units? Do you think we'll start seeing chapters like the Iron Hands and the Salamanders with their own Primaris specific units, or even the Raven Guard? Technically, the Ultramarines do, in the form of the Victrix Guard, already have that, but they already have the Tyrannic War Veterans, so arguably they actually had their own special unique units from before Primaris were around. But as I said, I leave it to you. What do you think? What do you think we'll see? And as a result, what do you think will change within the hierarchy of the chapters themselves? Let me know. I look forward to hearing from you. So, those are my thoughts on the Primaris range for the chapter-specific units and why they haven't manifested just yet. But like I said, I'm interested to hear what you guys think, so please do comment below. And whilst you're there, if you feel like it, hit the like button, subscribe, all that good YouTube shilly stuff. I post videos on Wednesdays and Thursdays, as always, and we'll be keeping to that schedule for the foreseeable future. And here I say goodbye. Thank you very much for watching, and have a lovely day.